Welcome to Growing Your Firm, brought to you by Jetpack Workflow. We're here to help firms unlock the secrets to help you reach your goals faster. And now, here's your host, founder and CEO of Jetpack Workflow, David Cristello.
Hey everybody, David Cristello here, founder and CEO of Jetpack Workflow and host of Founder CEO Podcasts. Today, I have a guest who I've known for 5-6 years. I mean, this is so common. I feel like in the founder CEO community, you start joining circles and going to conference. You just meet a lot of people on a similar journey. And that's how I met Pawel Brzeminski a couple of years ago in some sunny location where these events typically are. Pawel was able to launch, grow, and successfully exit a fantastic company, which we're going to get into earlier today. We're going to talk about what it's like to not only reach a scale where it becomes an acquisition target, but maybe what that process looked like at a high level, then what's life been like afterwards. So we're going to get to his story and how he successfully ran the arc of snap projections and so much more. But first and foremost, Pawel, welcome to the show.
Awesome, David. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So take us back, super high level. When did you launch Snap Projections?
All right. Well, let's go back. So I was, talking with financial advisors, financial planners, and basic Snap Projections. Let's maybe quick intro. We essentially help financial advisors, financial planners to grow their assets under management and receive more referrals through financial planning. So I started talking to financial advisors back 2014.
Why them, as a side note?
You know what? This is a good question always. So I was exiting another business. We were doing some work with credit analytics in PNC insurance, and we've had the opportunity to sell that business to one of the customers. I was kind of looking for something else, and I was always interested in the stock market. This was just kind of interest of mine. My mom is an accountant, so the financial matters were always important for me. And I'm, as you can probably tell by my accent, I'm Eastern European, so kind of very different kind of upbringing maybe. And kind of thinking about money before I came to Canada. So I thought I want to help people managing their finances and making sure that they have the peace of mind when they are still working and really a lot of clarity and better lifestyle when they retire. So that was kind of the starting point.
As a side note, when you sold your first business prior to Snap Projections, did that transaction make you financially secure? Were you able to take a lot, or is that kind of you sold it to give you the space to launch your next thing?
Yeah, so this was, I think this the former. I mean, this was a very different company. I would say kind of more enterprise. We're selling as in my late 20s, I was selling to probably the most risk-averse people on the planet, like actuaries and for rank insurance companies. So it was not the best target for kind of to learn. But we built some interesting technology, and basically there was an opportunity for one of the customers to get acquired. And of course, long story short, we've raised a little bit of money for that business at a time. So we made some money, but it wasn't much because a lot of money basically went back to paid investors and so on. So, but it was, it was still a small win, and it was definitely made a lot of mistakes at a time. And I thought, maybe I don't want to do enterprise, in the next business. That's kind of the learning. So with Snap, going back to Snap, so I was kind of talking to financial advisors, and then we started building the product. And I think we launched in 2015, around May or June 2015. Yeah.
Okay. Let's have some fun and jump around with time. So 2015, you're launching. What year did you get acquired?
It was fall 2019. So it was about 4.5 years, not even 4.5 years after.
4.5 years. Fantastic. And so what happened? I mean, I'm curious, were you trying to sell in the year that you got acquired, or how did this all come to a head in the fall of 2019?
Yeah. And this is actually a really good question, right? Because I wasn't trying to sell the company. And I think you probably hear the story from many other entrepreneurs. The company was kind of in this kind of nice spot. We were fast for $500,000. We definitely had product market fit, 6 people on board, and we're scaling. And I was basically looking at growing the team and looking how we can effectively access capital. I mean, I've raised some money before, so I knew that I don't want to jump in with, necessarily the first person who comes along. And we've been able to tap to a lot of federal provincial grants in Canada, raised several $100,000 for the company at the time, but it was not enough. And we were able to hire a couple of people, but as running the early stage, especially SaaS software, just consumes a lot of capital. So
eats it all day long. You know
That's
what I
exactly
mean?
it. Yeah. And so I was talking with, some angels, some VCs, and I quickly realized that I don't necessarily want to raise money from VCs, although we actually had an offer at the time from a VC, but that would also require us to kind of change things in the business. And I wasn't really comfortable with that. So we said no to that. And I found out that the amount of money that I was trying to raise, which is, around maybe 500,000, around maybe a million, maybe a million and a half. It's not exactly, it's probably too big for angel investors. I'll have a lot of people on a cap table. And, that's another thing that, it's going to take a long time. And there's going to be a lot of management ongoing with that. So I thought, okay, well, angels, not exactly. VCs, probably not, what is another option, right? And long story short, we've actually one of the customers that actually started using Snap Projections was one of the two most prominent robo advisors in Canada, and they were using our software. They were much bigger company, and they're growing much faster, and they were actually acquired a year earlier, I think, by one of the largest independent investment management companies in Canada, public entity. So I was basically developing a good relationship with them, talking about, okay, well, I'm trying to raise a little bit of money. They needed more features. And at some point, that conversation kind of started. Maybe we'll invest. And so later, maybe we'll do maybe majority stake. And then at some point, I found out that, public companies don't necessarily like minority investors. So then this kind of transitioned into full acquisition. And then, of course, it happened over a pretty short period of time. So I had to sort of reset my expectations a little bit around raising money, and it was really interesting offer. So I thought, well, you know what? Let's go along with that. Let's see if it makes sense. And it turns out that we're able to basically get to the point that it made a lot of sense for me. Definitely made sense for the team, and there was a lot of synergies with acquire. So I ended up didn't know if I'm going to sell the company, but basically actually made a lot of sense. And we decided to do it.
So one thing I think that always drives a lot of I'll just call it founder worry during this period, right? So you get an inbound, you're out raising money, somebody comes in, you have a strategic comes in, oh, maybe I'll make an investment. Maybe I'll make a really big investment. Actually, we should just roll you in and you should just be part of the family or team or whatever they, call the organization. And I've seen it happen somewhat frequently, which is oh, wait a second. We're doing an investment run. Now we're doing acquisition. Should we go out and shop as an acquisition? Should we go try to, should we run this whole process now? Wait, are we being for sale? And you can get into this endless negotiation with yourself. Did that surface for you at all? Or was it just so natural and was it such a good fit? You're like, no, this makes sense. Let's do it.
Yeah. You know what? This is interesting, right? Because I think I had enough time to basically go through all those thoughts before that conversation started. So I was very clear and on what are the options and what options do I have within the market where at that point we're still in Canada and we're thinking maybe of expansion to the US and other markets. And I was thinking that, well, you know what, if I was very clear that it's probably going to be a very good outcome for me. It's kind of on the, maybe not completely life changing, but, very close to it. And, we're in financial planning, so that really depends a lot on your lifestyle, right? So,
yeah.
And so that was one thing. The other thing is I wanted to definitely increase the salaries for the employees, and they didn't have any benefits at the time, or that was not existent, right? So I want to make sure that that's going to be covered. We can actually build a team. And of course, there was a lot of synergies with Acquire, right? Because they have a lot of advisors. They could start using the platform, and there's a lot of expansion. So it really made sense for me personally. It made sense for the employees, made sense for Acquire. And when I kind of looked at that, it's okay, well, I wasn't really thinking about selling and doing something completely different. So, and that's really, I would say, a good lesson for anybody who is in this position. You can really structure acquisition the way you want it. Of course, it has to be willingness on the other side. But what we've done, I basically said, okay, well, if you want to own the equity, and I understand why you want to have control over the IP, fine. But I don't necessarily want to go and to do something else. I'd like to work with this company and grow this company with you. And at the same time, they were saying, sure, let's do this. We're going to make investments. So as a part of the letter of intent, LOI, and the whole acquisition process, that was part of our sale purchase agreement, essentially, right? So I would sell the company, but they would basically keep the whole team, and we wouldn't actually be merged into full mothership of the public company, which would be probably a little bit excessive at our size at the time. But we negotiated that we would be left as one of the sister companies under essentially the big entity, which gave us a lot of freedom to operate, which we still have, which is great. And at the same time, there's commitment on the public entity to actually invest and as part of the budget. So that was great because, we closed the acquisition. And then we have the capital that I never had before to be able to test some of the marketing ideas, hire the right people. And that was amazing. And I wanted to actually go through this journey. So that was kind of maybe unusual path, but I think it's a good learning opportunity, good insight for a lot of people in this position that you can shape it the way you want. And it worked really well for us.
And to be clear, do you have co-founders? Do you have a board? Did you have investors? You mentioned some of the grants you got through the Canadian government, but did you, like, when this opportunity is coming your way, who did you have to get any sign off, or was like, you're it? Like, if you decide to do it, that's it.
Pretty much all the grants were non-dilutive, right? So, there was just no commitment on that side. I didn't have any investors. Essentially, I invested a bunch of my own money, but I didn't have any investors in the company. And we've actually structured a stock options plan for our employees. So employees had options, but, I own like vast majority of the equity at the time. So, I mean, of course you have to get, I think I had to basically get on board my early engineer. And that was, I think, important. And there's a couple of ways to do that, but we were a good relationship and we had good relationship at the time. So that wasn't a problem. And therefore really the acquisition went really, really quickly. Right? Because we have like our metrics, we're prepared to raise money, right? So our accounting was perfect. Our metrics were fine. We knew exactly what's happening with the business. We were ready to go. And then, we're not raising money. We're getting acquired. Okay, well, we have everything in place. And that's why this process basically took us, half of the time that normally it takes.
So from signed LOI to wire hitting your bank account, how long was that period?
4 months, 17 days or so. 4.5 months.
So you're not a numbers person, I take it? 4 months, 17 days.
No. There was actually a funny story, right? And timing is interesting, right? Because we closed, it was late 2019 and of course 2020 in March pandemic hit, right? So it was interesting, right? And we really lucked out with that because I think if we get to the pandemic and of course stock market tanked, so that acquisition probably would be postponed, maybe valuation would have changed. But the lawyer that was actually advising us, one of the bigger firms, and he basically said that at the end, when everything was done and signed, he said that, Pawel, this is maybe not miracle, but this is basically completely redefined with your team what is possible. Because I was expecting that typically those acquisitions take 9 months, 10 months. We're dealing with public entities, so things take time. And that public entity was actually, doing other M&A, and there was, $1 billion acquisitions at the same time. So we're small peanuts in comparisons with the magnitude of how much capital they were deploying, how much capital is at stake, right? So, and he said, 4.5 months, I've never thought it's possible. I've done a lot of acquisitions, between California and Toronto here, Canada. And so he's like, yeah, this was well done and good timing.
So you think you attribute that to the organization of your data room, or did you do other things to drive the urgency or through that due diligence period?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. So what I think we've done a lot of things right. And one of the important primary things that I think we did well is I immediately hired M&A consultants to basically help us to get the thing across the finish line. And later on, I dove very quickly and kind of educated myself on M&A acquisitions because again, I've done this before, but this one is a little bit different. And I wanted to kind of refresh my knowledge. But that person was basically, he used to be an ex-CEO of a public company. So he knew exactly how the companies operate. And I was able to actually really bring him on. He can lead the process. At the same time, I wanted to focus on running the company. So I want to make sure that, we can continually grow and, have a predictable process all the way to the end. And you know what? Most acquisitions do not close, right? So I want to make sure that, if this doesn't close, there's not going to be a lot of, opportunity kind of lost as part of us engaging in the process. So that worked out really well. He was professional about it. There is a team behind it. There was a data room. He had a great relationship with lawyers that he worked with, and we decided to work with those lawyers as well. So that process was structured. I had to basically bring our accountants, of course, in the loop because, that's another, thing that's you should probably do. Let your accountant very quickly know that there is an acquisition because there's going to be probably some interim financial statements that you will need to deliver. And so we were able to do it. He was able to run the process. And what else?
Well, you
These are
mentioned
probably
you
the main
mentioned
components.
you mentioned book resources. Was there a recommended book or resource, if folks are going to diving into M&A that they should look at?
There was a couple of them. And there was an old book by Basil Peters, I think, Early Exits. It's kind of more, niche area, but I was able to dug this out. It was like actually quite useful. And there was another book by, what's his name? Bo Burlingham, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Something about, finishing big or something like this. Again, it covers a lot of stories about M&A. And really that was useful because you mentioned this kind of negotiation with yourself, like that really becomes real. And you have to kind of see you have to be able to harness that so you don't make really silly decisions as part of the process. And again, having somebody else run the process for you, that was critical. These are the two resources that I remember, but I think there's a lot more right now, especially, this was almost 4 years ago now that I think about it. So there's MicroAcquire or acquire.com right now. There's a lot more information of acquisitions, especially smaller scale acquisitions. So I think they probably have some great info as well.
Yeah. To jump around a little bit. So 4.5 years, launched 2015, sell 2019. You put money into this new venture, it's got to work, right? Did you have any, I don't like this word, so if you have a better one, let me know. Do you have any balance at this point? Was it 18 hours a day in snap mode, or how are you thinking about the structure of your life to, 4.5 is a quick journey. That's still a long period of time, nearly 5 years. And so was it grinding 20 hours a day the whole time, or did you find ways to structure your lifestyle to maintain it?
Yeah, well, I was working 60, 70 hours a week on a regular basis, right? And we were, and during that time, my wife and I were, of course, thinking about children, and we're kind of postponing children a little bit, but, there was only, there was expiry date on that. So at some point we had a child, right? So it was basically, and it was actually interesting, right? And kind of funny story, because when I was going to meet with the CEO of a company that's basically, was going to talk about acquisition with us, this was Friday. And at that time, my wife, and this was exactly the day where our second son was born, right? So then I rescheduled. She was in Toronto for a couple of days, and I rescheduled like, hey, Friday doesn't work. By the way, I have a good reason, I'm in the hospital right now, but how about Tuesday? So she's like, okay, we can still do that, right? So, and this was the time, so newborn on board with us, and I had 2-year-olds, from earlier. So look, and then at the same time, we moved across the country, right? Because I used to be in Western Canada, back in Edmonton, then we moved to Toronto. So new house, and of course,
What year? This was all 2019. Is that what you're telling me?
This was, well, we moved to the late 2017. So it was basically, we're kind of, moved a little bit earlier, but still moving with a child, selling everything what we had there, moving, and then new child. And it was tough. So I don't think there was a lot of balance. I kind of liked it though, because you can make a lot of progress very quickly. And of course, at some point you're getting to the point that's, you're burning out. And I didn't, it's so funny because you read about those stories about entrepreneurs burning out, and then you're like, oh yeah, I have enough balance. And of course, this is your own skewed perspective. You don't have right balance. And then it was very clear after acquisition, then I had some actually a spinal compression injury that was kind of exacerbated by the stress and so on. So yeah, it was pretty hairy at a time. I remember getting to the car, and it normally would, have to kind of hang on to the roof a little bit, slowly, move in, and then go on Saturday to work to basically send some other information and to do, because there is request for information during the acquisition process at the tail of it, right? So it was basically, stress was at that level, which I didn't even realize that basically it definitely took a toll on my health. And that continued for another couple of years. So it's not, it's pretty important.
Hey everyone, David Cristello here, of course, host of the Growing Your Firm podcast and founder CEO at Jetpack Workflow. I want to give a shout out to one of our sponsors, LiveFlow. Now, we know building financial models can be frustrating, time consuming, and an error-prone exercise. Well, it's time to say goodbye to manually entering financial data. Embrace automatic updates and streamline financial management. Here's the good news. LiveFlow just launched a new consolidation product. Their automated multi-entity consolidation is simple to use. You can easily map multiple unmatching chart of accounts from multiple QuickBooks Online companies into one standardized report. Now, once it's set up, LiveFlow automatically updates the consolidations in real time so you can focus on analysis using instantly updated data across those entities. LiveFlow can even consolidate financials that are in different currencies. And the possibilities don't stop there. LiveFlow empowers you with flexible, powerful reporting tools to create customized dashboards that meet your specific needs. Build executive presentations, cash flow forecasts, and more with just a few clicks. To stop grueling over manual consolidation reports, visit liveflow.io, that's liveflow.io, and use promo code JETPACK for 20% off. All right, let's get back to the show. Yeah, it's interesting because I haven't personally I haven't been on the other end of the spectrum post-acquisition, right? So still in the trenches running, but somebody described it to me as like, when you are able to go to the other side and you throttle off a little bit, you're like, wow, that was a lot, but you've calibrated your nervous system and your life and your mindset to startup mode. And so when you get out of that, you kind of look at it, you're like, that's like, oh, I have these back problems, or I have this I have these problems actually as a result of that. And I didn't realize the state I was in because that was just every day. Like that's just status quo, right? And then you take the red line off a little bit and you're like, oh, right. So it's interesting when you look at it, how different it could be.
So common. And again, it's super hard to realize when you aren't just in the midst of it. But yeah, I've heard that before and I've experienced myself, and I'm sure it happens, more than, people would like.
The kid thing is really trippy because we're in a very similar boat. And then, yes, at some point you just have to have a kid. Like there is an expiration point, right? And so like we ended up having, multiple kids in the middle of running Jetpack, right? And so I know the first, I would say 0 to 1 kid feels like total overhaul of lifestyle. Going from 1 to 2, you're like, you kind of know, every kid's a little different, but you're like, you're okay, this is going to happen. This sleepless night, you kind of know what you're in for. That 0 to 1 though was like, oh my gosh, what has happened to my life? Like I just, entirely different schedule, you're just you have this human being you're trying to keep alive. It is really trippy to kind of go, and it's amazing. But when you're in the middle of running a startup, you're like, wow, this is a huge, huge adjustment, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, it felt like that for us. And I mean, one of the reasons why we actually moved from Alberta at the time to Eastern Canada is because we could have a little bit more help from my wife's parents, right? So that was kind of the reason. And of course, there was good business reasons at the time, which is sort of move. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And of course, you kind of talk to people, you think about it, and you prepare, and it still hits you when it happens.
Yeah, honestly, in hindsight, not that it really matters or we're ever going to go back to it, but it's like, I don't know, could have been earlier, later. I don't know. When it hits, and it's always just, going to be a lot no matter when it hits, unless I guess you've reached this magical place of liquidity where you're like, hey, I'm retired. You're retired. We have nothing to do. Let's just knock out some kids. This is, this is not where most of us find ourselves. That there's a biological clock here, for folks. Well, to switch gears to scaling up the business, you mentioned that right before acquisition, you had this team, you wanted to give them a bump, you wanted to go out, you wanted to hire, you got new resourcing as part of the acquisition. How did that shift your approach to hiring and, being under a large parent company? How did you use that to your advantage for recruiting purposes?
Yeah, so actually this is interesting, right? Because initially, of course, we're running recruiting internally, right? So, and kind of going back a little bit, after acquisition, there is a period of time of adjustment, sort of, you're being integrated. Even if you're fully subsidiary, you're still, under, there's a lot of systems that you sort of need to transition. And we've done it twice, right? Because there's one robo-advisor systems, and then of course their systems were merged into the parent company as well. So that was kind of unexpected and it took too much time. But just kind of going back, I guess your question was more about deploying capital and leveraging to your advantage. So I think there's a couple of things. When it comes to recruiting, actually, it's not great that you're owned by a large company and they're doing recruiting for you. And this is something that I didn't realize at that time, because typically people who apply and go and want to work for this big company, with a shiny brand, they typically are, let's say, a software engineer from a team of, 250 software engineers working on a big project. It's a completely different person that you need to basically at more of a startup smaller company that basically wears a lot of hats, wants to have a lot of responsibility and sort of can do a lot. And so if you hire this kind of person, then they're not going to fit. And the problem is that, again, if they're recruiting sort of public company recruiting structured around those kind of people, it's really hard to explain this to them and get this point across that, who do we need is a little bit different. So basically at some point we actually, especially with software engineers, we started recruiting ourselves. I mean, just that was kind of the needed aspect of it. And yeah, so I think the synergies, but that was the kind of more negative on the recruiting front. On the positive side, especially with synergies, I mean, especially with larger companies, we were going up market. We have some really large companies that basically wanted to do business with us. And of course, if you have a strong partner, the whole aspect of, are you going to be around in a couple of years is going away, right? Because you have a, multi-billion company behind you and you can leverage that, right? So that helped. The one nuance to it is that you have to also look at the map of the market, because there are some other public companies usually in the market, they compete with your company, and then the market is kind of structured that at some point you can use those synergies towards your growth, but in some cases it locks certain aspect of the market away from you because other public organizations they would deem you to be more competitive. So that's something that people don't really realize sometimes, but it occurs. It doesn't really materialize massively for us, but it's something that came up a couple of times in conversations. I'm like, I would never think about that. That's an interesting point.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so you're 2019, you're 4 years into post acquisition. I guess what were some surprising, so let me kind of set up this way, right? So we've talked to founder CEOs, they sell, and there's just this spectrum of experiences that happen after. The fact that you've been there since 2019 means that something is going okay post acquisition, right? I think it's somewhat the norm where it's like, if founder CEO doesn't make it 12 months, it's like the majority will drop off first 12 months, or they're going to stay there for 3, 4, 5 years. And obviously acquisitions can be structured to retain talent, further into it. And so I guess at a high level, what are some of the surprising aspects or beneficial aspects post acquisition that you've seen, given that it appears like you have a good working relationship with parent company? You've been there for a while. You made it past 12 months and, you didn't say, screw it, take, keep whatever handcuffs you put on me, whatever, keep the extra cash. You've been there for a good period. What do you think has made it so successful for you to be retained as talent within the organization?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think there's a lot of things that public company brings that is useful, right? I mean, you don't have to deal with finance and accounting on the level that you've been dealing with before. So that's kind of completely outsourced and abstracted out. And there is some touch points, of course, but for the most part, that's done. Legal, that's another thing. I mean, I have a legal question, for example, I have a counsel right now, and I can address those questions, very quickly and inexpensively, right? There is, of course, I mean, our team kind of stayed pretty small, around 10 people still, I mean, excluding some contractors, but of course we can tap into the vast resources of the public company, right? So that's good. And sometimes, you can basically leverage, right? So that's really good. I mean, the thing is, in our case, I mean, let's go back to the timeline. So we sort of got acquired a few months before the pandemic. Then of course the pandemic hit, market stanks, and for a lot of our customers, I mean, 30-40% of revenue that drop, they had to register, right? Because typically this is how they make money. So managing 2020 was beyond personal side. That was pretty tough. And then we're able to keep deploying the capital, and we're essentially able to scale the full inventory on the marketing side, on the ad spend. So there's a lot of different projects that we were able to do that I wanted to do. I had a backlog of ideas and projects. Okay, now I have the capital, I have the people. We're able to launch another line of business as well. We're able to take on bigger features. And that was still a lot of fun. Right now, we're getting to the point that, the initial budget and then subsequent budgets were spent, and we're kind of looking, there are bigger opportunities, but, in order to unlock the next sort of chunks in the budget, there are meetings and, things are happening at the high level. So things are going a little slower than I would like. But I think recruiting an HR function, that's also having somebody else that you can actually reach out very quickly and get advice on certain aspects, that's useful, right? And of course, the whole employee aspect, like around benefits, and, they can reach out to some people through benefits and so on. So I think there's a lot of good things. I mean, of course, it's never, the grass is never greener on the other side. There's always balance. And you still, even though you're kind of left under, as not fully merged into the mothership, you kind of you're still part of the kind of the cycle. So you have to really fight sometimes a little bit more strongly for making sure that you are heard, especially if you're smaller. So that's kind of the aspect that you have to be really, you have to essentially make sure that you are visible. But once this is done, then again, and of course, there's a ton of aspects of a relationship, who you are working with, and, what are the goals post-acquisition, how are you tracking versus budgets and so on. But for us, things went well. I mean, like really well, to the point that, like we were kind of completely almost left alone for the most part. We were able to really still make product decisions on our own, when it comes to the market as well. So, I mean, really, that was great. I had the money, I had the people, a lot of resources. And then, yeah, sure, I'm not the owner anymore. I can't make all decisions, but that was fun for a long time.
Yeah, it sounds like you were able to structure just this, and they live true to their word. A lot of autonomy in how to execute post-acquisition, which is exciting. Pawel, if somebody wants to reach out, say thanks for coming on, follow up with any questions, connect with you, what's the best way for them to do so?
You know what? I think LinkedIn probably actually will be a pretty good idea. So if they search for Snap Projections, or you can link up my LinkedIn profile, that's probably the best place for now.
All right, awesome. Yeah, if you want to reach out to Pawel, ask questions, tell them what you're working on, whatever it may be, hit them up. I know it's a great way to say thanks for coming on the show. If you enjoyed today's episode, leave a 5-star review. And Pawel, thanks again for coming on.
Thanks very much, David. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining Growing Your Firm, the podcast series for global, small, and medium-sized businesses ready to scale and increase profits. You can check out more podcasts by following the links in the show notes. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you're listening. At Jetpack Workflow, we're all about maximizing returns for accounting firms and CPAs. Check out more podcasts on growing your firm and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.